Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
I have great pleasure in presenting to you Sri C.V. Narasimhan, a distinguished diplomatist and also a very successful and popular Indian Civil Service officer. First of all, I would like to ask you, Mr. Narasimhan, about the influences in the early formative stages of your life that went to make up your personality, your character, the kind of motivations, the kind of inspiration that you derived from, especially from your home.
I must begin by saying I was born in a very famous pilgrimage center, Sri Rangam, the abode of Lord Ranganatha. My mother, with whom I lived in Sri Rangam for many years, she would not miss a single day of going to the temple any more than a good Christian would miss going to church. In truth, the first alphabet I learnt was Sanskrit rather than English or Tamil. And the influences of my religious background go back to my forefathers. My father was himself a Sanskrit scholar and a very religious man. I was born on 21 May 1915, but at that time my father was a postmaster, first in Mysore and then in Tiruchirappalli and then in Dhanushkodi and then in Madurai. So during the first 8 years of my life, I was in 4 different places, going to school for a year, at the most 2 years, and I do not have any clear recollection of those days, of those student days. But in 1923, my father was transferred to Madras and he was here for 4 years. And during those 4 years, I studied at the PS High School in Mylapore, Madras. It's still a going concern, as you know, a very well-known institution. I did not have any certificates from my school days, but on the basis of oral testing, the headmaster, his name was, I still remember, is Panchabhakesha Shastrigal. He admitted me into the first form.
So that means they were very flexible in those days. Today, without that piece of paper, you cannot hope to get into any school.
Fortunately, he admitted me into the first form, and I studied here for 4 years.
And the medium of instruction in those days, at that stage, English was English, even from first standard onwards. Yes. It was in all schools like that.
In first form onwards, definitely it was English.
It was English. For
example, mathematics, physics, they were all taught in English. And I studied at the PS High School till 1927. I remember some of the teachers who taught me at that time. Again, in my very formative years, I remember Professor of English, a gentleman called Shamanna. Many people who went to school at that time will remember him. He was a very fine man. The chemistry teacher was a gentleman called Venkata Subramanya Iyer. The physics teacher was Mr. P. Venkatrama Iyer. They were all personalities. They were not just teachers. My mathematics teacher was called Sitaram Iyer. We remember them well because they were very impressive figures. They were not just teachers.
So that is the school, SSLC, you passed from PS High School?
No. When I was still in the 4th form,
yes.
When I had completed my 4th form, my father was transferred to Bombay and he took us, meaning thereby myself and my 3 brothers, because by that time my 2 sisters were married and they were in Sri Rangam already. We went together with him and we had a flat in Dadar, and my immediately younger brother and I, we were admitted into a school there, English-speaking school, which was called the Antonio da Silva Anglo-Portuguese High School. It is still there in Dadar. It is now simply called the Antonio da Silva High School. It was about maybe 20 years ago, they completed their centenary and they invited me as a former student, and I went and participated in the centenary function of that school. I studied that for only 1 year, but the educational requirements of the Bombay system and the Madras system were quite different. And my father felt it would be a handicap for me and my brothers if I studied in Bombay, because ultimately I had to go to the Madras University. So in 1928, he decided, I might say very wisely, to move my mother and the 4 sons to Sri Rangam, where we had excellent educational facilities. And in 1928, we all went to Sri Rangam, where we had a separate establishment run by my mother. And there, I joined the National College High School.
Before that, Narasimhan, did you take SSLC or matriculation?
I did SSLC, because by that time I had come to Madras.
Yes.
So they admitted me into the 6th form in Madras, in National College High School, and I had to get through the SSLC. In fact, I was only 13 years and 9 months when I took the school leaving certificate examinations.
15 plus in...
And I had to get special exemption from the district educational officer who examined me personally and satisfied himself that I was a fairly tall and healthy looking chap. So he decided I was fit enough to take the SSLC examinations, although I was below 14. So I passed the SSLC when I was only less than 14 years old.
14 years.
And I joined the National College automatically. And there I took as my special subjects history and logic, because these were the subjects as 3 optionals. But these were the main things, history. But the people took what they called mathematics, physics and chemistry.
Most popular.
But I was very weak in mathematics. So I decided to avoid mathematics and I took these subjects. Of which history and logic.
Indian history, logic and special English, something like that.
That was what I took. And that was in the National College. I studied that for 2 years. So from 31 to 34, I studied at St. Joseph's, history, constitutional history under Professor Saldana. He was also professor of politics, and economics under Father Kati. But the man who changed my life was Professor Father Erhart, E-H-R-H-A-R-T. He was a youngish man. He had just come from Cambridge. He was only about 30 years old to join St. Joseph's, Trichinopoli. And he was my professor in my final year, 33 to 34. And it was he who urged me to apply for Oxford as soon as I got my honours first class degree. And that's a different story. What happened was, Father Erhart insisted that I should go to Oxford. Now, if I had been studying economics, I should have gone to Cambridge. Mathematics also Cambridge. But for history and literature,
humanities, Oxford.
Humanities generally, Oxford was the preferred place. And so he made me write a letter to Dr. Moses, who was then the coordinator for all applicants for foreign universities from Madras University. So I wrote a letter to him, giving him my background and a letter of recommendation from Father Erhart. I did not know what happened to my letter, but one fine day in August, I got a letter from Dr. Moses, who was a very kind and very helpful person, saying, you have been accepted at Oxford, at St. Catherine's Society, Oxford. So you must send a telegram immediately to the educational advisor, High Commissioner for India. The telegraphic address was High Command, HICOMIND, London, saying, thankfully accept Oxford offer, letter follows. I had to send that exact wording, which I did.
It was dictated by
Dr. Moses so helpfully. At that time, to be quite truthful, Dr. Abel, I did not have a clue as to how this education at Oxford was going to be financed. Because in those days, Oxford cost about £350 a year, about say 4,500 rupees a year. But 4,500 rupees a year was beyond the means of my father, whose salary was only about 800 rupees or 900 rupees a month in those days. Financial problem was not in getting me to Oxford, because in those days, the fare for a student from Bombay to London was only £25. And the fare to Marseille, 23, and the train journey from Marseille to Oxford was only about £7, 30 pounds in all, 400 rupees. That was not the problem. The problem was to maintain me at Oxford for 2 years, which would have cost about £700, which was beyond my father's means. So my father was by that time posted as postmaster in Pune, and he came to know as personal friends some very important people in the Parsi community. And he was confiding to one of them that he had a son who wanted to go to Oxford, but he had some little financial difficulty. And immediately these Parsi friends told him, we will take care of that. How? We are very good friends with the Tata Foundation. Which gives these scholarships. Unfortunately, if I had applied in time, I might have got a full scholarship for my 2 years at Oxford as a loan. I returned to India, hopefully with a good job and repayable in very easy installments. But I had not applied in time. So they managed to get an outright grant of £300 to be paid in installments, so that in effect my father, for my 2 years at Oxford, he had only to foot the bill for half the cost, meaning there were about 250 rupees a month, which was well within his means. He could do that. And that's how I went to Oxford. But the fare from Bombay to London was only £25, 21 days of food. But to Marseille, because we could save one whole week of travel by going via Marseille, I had to pay only £23.
So that is how you joined the Oxford University. honors again, did the honors, BA honors course in history.
That's correct.
So what was the motivation for you to enter to try for this ICS and also ultimately successfully join the ICS course?
I'll be very glad to respond. To begin with, I must say I had no choice in the matter. Because when I got this Tata scholarship, to which I referred earlier, it was one of the conditions of the scholarship that I should sit for the ICS examination.
You mean to say that all the scholarships were...
In my particular case.
But in a particular case, but
that
not,
was
general,
the
it's not a general rule for everybody who got the
It was
scholarship.
in writing, it was a condition which I accepted gladly. Because it was, in any case, it was one of the things I would have done in any event. Because I had to come back to India
Scholarship
with
or
a
no
degree,
scholarship.
or no scholarship,
Yes.
and I had to earn a living. So, I completed my history honors in the summer of 1936, in June, and the ICS examinations are held in July. Then I reported for duty before the Chief Secretary of the Government of Madras. His name was C.F. Brackenbury. I reported to him, and I started my career in October 1937. When I came here, of course, amongst the people I called upon was Radhakrishnan.
He was here in this
He was living
Madras.
in a rented house just off what is now called TTK Road, then called Mowbray's Road.
Yes.
It was in a sort of a house called the Ashwins. There were two houses identical to each other, and they were called the twins. They were called the Ashwins. He was living in one of them. I went to call on him. Then he said, Narasimhan, come and have tea with me tomorrow. So I went there. And I found there sitting three people, Dr. Chari, his wife Mrs. Chari. They were all from Rangoon. And their daughter called Janaki. And we had a nice cup of tea together and so on. We talked about it. And then they left. And Radhakrishnan asked me to stay. And he asked me, how do you like that girl? She was at that time studying in the
Queen Mary's College.
Queen Mary's College. She was in her final year BA. And the long and short of it is, we did get married in May of 1938.
May 1938.
And
Before you went to...
And Radhakrishnan arranged that marriage for me. And we would have been married 60 years in 2 years' time.
So after the marriage, you had to go to Visakhapatnam or...
As I told you, I went to Visakhapatnam as assistant collector
Yes.
in October 1937.
Yes.
We got married only in May 38.
So
During that time, of course,
so engaged and then...
yes, marriage was in May 38.
Yes.
By that time, my wife had completed her third year in BA.
So...
And I decided that she should complete her BA degree requirements and get her BA degree before she joined me. So in 1939, it happened I completed my probationary period as assistant collector also. And I passed the two language tests, Telugu lower and Telugu higher.
Yes.
By the time I was quite proficient in Telugu, I might add. And I was posted as a sub-collector, Narsipatnam. Narsipatnam is a very large sub-collectorate, what's called the subdivision, because it includes 1400 square miles, what is called the agency, where the very primitive people, very sparsely inhabited. And I enjoyed being there. I had 2 elephants in my entourage as part of my staff. One was called Lakshmi and other was called Chanchal Pyari. And every day they had to be fed in my presence to make sure that they got their ration of rice and jaggery and coconut and so on. They were given my presence. Every day I had to do that. Part of my duties to make sure that the 2 elephants were fed. And I was the first sub-collector in many years to march through the agency with my entourage.
Very difficult.
And listen to the people's complaints and see whatever could be done on the spot, because we had very considerable powers in the agency. I enjoyed my 1 year as sub-collector in Narsipatnam, but this was in 1939. And then after 1 year, the powers that be decided that Narsipatnam was not heavy enough a district for the talents I was able to show in administration. So they transferred to me a very heavy division called Dindigul, which is now a district headquarters. In those days, it was a division. We had the Dindigul headquarters division, and then we had got this Neelakote division, Kodaikanal division, and Palni.
That's Coimbatore district.
Not division, they were called talukas.
Palni
taluk, Neelakote taluk, Kodaikanal sub-taluk, and Dindigul taluk. And very heavy in the sense that both the criminal work and the revenue work was very heavy.
Dindigul.
Yes, but by that time, the war had also started. So we had all kinds of rules and regulations, the Defence of India Act, the Defence of India rules, price control and so on. All this was my responsibility to see. And in 1940, the middle of 1940, my wife was with child, and as tradition would demand it, She went to Rangoon where my father-in-law was practicing as a doctor. So our first child, our first daughter called Hema, she was born in Rangoon, in 1940 December. Then my wife joined me in 1941, and 1941 to 1942 we were in Dindigul. I enjoyed every minute of my stay in Dindigul. It was a very interesting place. My hands were full with my official work. The district headquarters was Madurai. I enjoyed going to Madurai. Be that as it may, I spent 2 years in Dindigul. And then
became a district collector afterwards?
No, I was posted after 2 years. Unfortunately, I was posted to Devakote. So in May 1942, I went to Devakote.
And that was a very exciting year, 1942.
1942 was this year when Quit India movement started. So Sunday, the 9th of August, 1942. I remember the date as it was yesterday.
Yes.
And the worst rioting took place in Devakote. The worst. And the conditions were so bad in Devakote headquarters itself. There was even an attempt on my life, although it was not a very serious attempt. That same night, I took a train to Srirangam, where my mother was, and left my wife with my mother, and my elder daughter came with my mother, and arranged for them to travel the next day to Madras. Because by that time, my father-in-law and mother-in-law had found, because of the Japanese invasion and everything, this was in 42, after 1941 Pearl Harbor, the Japanese threat was there. So they had come to Madras. So they had a house in Madras, and I sent my wife to join them. She was actually carrying our second child, who was born in November 1942. Her name is Kala. And I had to live in the police station because my life was
danger.
And we had a battalion of the Jat regiment with us. And we had 6 armored cars and so on. Everywhere I went in the armored car. This sub-treasury in Tundi was looted. All kinds of things happened.
In 1942.
Anyhow, I got a letter from the Chief Secretary. You have been posted as Under Secretary Development. Please report for duty in Madras as soon as possible. I came to Madras in September 1942 and I reported for duty. At that time, because of the flap in 1942 summer, the officers of the Fort St. George had moved away. And our offices were in Pachepa's college because the colleges were also closed. Then later on we moved, of course, to the regular secretariat. Anyhow, my official career in the government of Madras secretariat started in 1942, and it ran for 6 years without any interruption in the development department. I was in charge of civil supplies. I was in charge of price control. I was in charge of export and import of rice, of jaggery, of sugar, everything.
And that was time when this rationing and this controls, they were very stringently opposed.
Then in 1947, of course, we became independent. Meanwhile, I must tell you also another story. The governor for a long time was a man called Sir Arthur Hope.
Yes, Arthur.
To be quite truthful, I can say today he had a bad reputation. Bad reputation, especially for his morals. That was his business, but since he was the governor, he was supposed to set an example. And the man who was appointed to succeed him was a man called Sir Archibald Nye, N-Y-E. Nye had been chief of the Imperial General Staff during World War II. Very distinguished soldier. In 1947, the Congress governments came back, and we had a chief minister of the name of Omandur Ramaswamy Reddy. He was a very honest man, a very straightforward man. He did not like anybody to stand up to him. And I stood up to him. Because my explanation was demanded on a file where I had not given any decision, but the decision had been given by Raghav Menon, who did not have a very good reputation. So I wrote a long explanation, and I said, from this it will be clear to the Chief Minister. If any explanation is due from anybody, it is due from his honorable colleague, the Minister for Food. That's what I wrote. I was not afraid. I couldn't care less. And then he got very angry with me. And at that time, the Textile Commissioner was Mr. S. Venkateshwaran. He had been promoted to the Board of Revenue, and he wanted me to take over there as Textile Commissioner. Now, ordinarily I would have jumped at it because they kept me in Madras where all my interests were, my morning tennis, my music lessons with my guru, Mr. Subramanian every day, and so on. But the Textile Commissioner's office was in charge of permits for yarn and this and that, and the pressures were endless, morning, noon and night. People coming with letters from ministers, from chief ministers, everybody. I did not want that. So I told him, dear Chief Minister, sir, I would prefer not to go to the Textile Commissioner. He said, in that case, you'll have to go to a district as collector. I said, sir, I would welcome that. I have always regretted the fact that I have not had district experience. please send me to Kurnool.
Yeah.
Because it was considered the worst posting in those days. Kadapa and Kurnool were considered the worst places.
Yes.
I'll be glad to go to Kurnool. But he posted me to a delightful station, Salem. And I was there for only 9 months. I enjoyed every day I had spent there. And then Reddyar left. And his successor was Mr.
Kumarasamy Raja.
Yes. From Rajapalayam. I knew him very well. And his first task was to appoint me as Secretary Board of Revenue. He brought me back here. But then I was titular Secretary Board of Revenue, but they decided that the Deputy Collector's list would not be prepared by me, but by the additional Secretary Board of Revenue, a very fine man called Mascarenas. And nothing against him. But Mascarenas was not a civil service man.
He became the registrar of the
Yes, he was very, very much junior to me in the service, but he was additional secretary and he was supposed to prepare the... At that point, I decided I must leave this communal-ridden government. And poor Kumarasamy Raja could not do anything about that.
That was in which year, sir?
This was in 1949-50. Then I decided I would go to Delhi. And we used to have Secretary Board of Revenue. We had a dining table where the board members and the secretaries came for lunch. And do you know what happened? Just as the Deputy Collector's list was to be prepared, Mascarenas was taken seriously ill. And finally I had to prepare the Deputy Collector's list. And then in 1950, by the time, of course, we had become independent and so on, and Panditji was, partition had taken place, and Panditji was the Chief Prime Minister. I went to Delhi to the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. The Ministry of Food and Agriculture consisted of two departments, the Department of Food and the Department of Agriculture. I was Deputy Secretary in the Department of Agriculture. And the Minister for both Food and Agriculture was Jairam Das Daulatram.
Yes.
He was a Sindhi. He was like many other Sindhis, he was an emigre. And there were a number of Sindhis in the department. Many of them brought in by Jairam Das Daulatram. Mir Chandani, Ram Chandani, people like that, you see. All of them very able people, I have nothing against them. But the place was crawling with Sindhis. And the minister, the secretary of the department was a man called K.M. Lal Punjabi. He was a senior, very senior ICS officer. And of him, S.Y. Krishnasamy used to say, look at this fellow. He is a double-faced villain. He is a Sindhi, he calls himself Punjabi. That was his joke about K.M. Lal Punjabi, very able officer. They were all very nice to me. But Jairam Das Daulatram was posted as Governor of Assam by Panditji.
Yes.
And appointed me as the chairman of the Central Tractor Organization. And I ran that organization from January 1950 to the middle of 1953. That organization had a loan from the World Bank for equipment, and it had not been doing very well, but I was able to turn it around to such an extent that the World Bank made a film, a documentary film about that project called the Khan's Grass Reclamation Project. That is what we are engaged in, reclaiming land which was affected by this weed, which was called the Khan's Grass. Khan's is, by the way, Kamsa grass.
Kamsa grass is one of the 10.
And that was my achievement. Anyhow, there were, Rafi Ahmad Kidwai became the Minister for Food and Agriculture, and he and I did not get on well at all. One of the few people with whom I did not get on well, he was one of them. And I was transferred to the Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs. The dear Lord works in various ways, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because I moved from a specialized field to a very much broader field, where I could show my expertise.
Mr. Deshmukh was the finance minister.
Deshmukh was the finance minister
at that time.
He had a very distinguished career in the ICS. He had been governor of the Reserve Bank. He was a finance minister. He had been member of finance of the Planning Commission also. And from there he had come as finance minister. And we got on very well. The result was, in 1956, he nominated me to be the executive director for the World Bank. But as I mentioned in my recollections, for various reasons that did not go through. And it so happened that Krishna Menon took a great fancy to me. And Krishna Menon's main interest was the United Nations. And he had decided that I would be a very good Indian representative in the UN Secretariat. At that time, Hammarskjöld came to a meeting of ECFA. I did not know at that time, in 9 months' time, I would be the Executive Secretary of ECFA. And the ECFA meeting was due to take place in Bangalore. So the Secretary General had come to inaugurate that session along with Panditji, along with the Prime Minister. I arrived in New Delhi on a Thursday. There's a big luncheon, dinner in his honor on a Friday, to which I had been invited. And at that dinner, N.R. Pillai, the Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry, External Affairs Ministry, took him aside and he said, Mr. Secretary General, this is C.V. Narasimhan, about whom we have spoken to you. Meaning thereby, Krishna Menon
Already
had spoken to you. He said, yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad to meet you. And then I said, should I call on you tomorrow? He said, let us see. If possible, I would like to see you tomorrow. So the dinner was a great success, but we did not have any further exchange at all. The next morning, he was leaving for Chandigarh because Hammarskjöld was a multifaceted personality. He had interest in architecture also. And Corbusier was the architect for
Chandigarh.
Chandigarh. He was one of the panel of architects for the United Nations Secretariat building.
Building also.
For the United Nations complex of building, not the Secretariat building alone. So I left word with this secretary who was looking after him in Hyderabad house. And I said, when the Secretary General comes, I'll be waiting for a call from you in case he wants to see me. So at 6 o'clock, I got a call from him. The Secretary General has come back and he says, no need to see you. So what do you make of that? So I thought, my goose is cooked, never mind. But he added, he would like to see you next time you go to New York.
Yeah.
And this was the thing that made me interested, you see. Finally, as it happened, in May, I had to go on Government of India business to the United States. And I asked for an interview with the Secretary General. He gave it to me. And we had a very good talk at that time. Again, I was more of a listener than a speaker.
Yeah.
And Arthur Lal, who was our permanent representative, was also with me at that time. And then we parted company. I did my job there. I had a number of missions accomplished on behalf of the Government of India. So in 56 summer, I was there, first of all, to negotiate loan for Tata Iron Steel Company.
Yeah.
And also to negotiate a public law 480 loan. Well, actually it was a loan only in name of food grains for the Government of India. And I got 1 million tons of food grains as a public law 480 shipment to India. And I signed the agreement on behalf of the Government of India. What happened then was, Hammarskjöld sent a message to me while I was completing my work, getting ready to go back to India. He sent a message to me, I want to see you again. And this was on a Monday, it's all in my book, Recollections, in early June. He said, I am not in a position to offer you a position at the Undersecretary General level in headquarters because I have no vacancy. But the post of Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Asia, it was held by a very distinguished Indian economist, Dr. P.S. Lokanathan. He is retiring because he has reached the age of superannuation. I would like to offer that post to you. How do you feel? I said, Mr. Secretary General, my field has been economic administration. I would love to have the job, but I cannot say yes or no. It is for the Government of India to say. So he said, what should I do? I said, send for Krishna Menon. He is still here. And he was the man who proposed my name to you. So he sent for Krishna Menon. I might add that the personal equation between Krishna Menon and Hammarskjöld was not all that cordial. But on this particular occasion, they both had the same purpose, to get me inducted into the Secretariat. And as it happened, Krishna Menon and I found ourselves on the same plane that same night for London. And in London, Prime Minister Nehru was also there for some Commonwealth conference. In the course of that morning, they decided, okay, we will release him. And the telegram went to Hammarskjöld. The meeting with me was on Monday. The meeting with Krishna Menon was on Monday afternoon. On Tuesday, when he opened his mail, there was a telegram from the Government of India saying, accepted.